Hey guys, I've had a few questions about this PLC practical and specifically some of the more trickier control elements such as interlocks and timers and that sort of stuff. So I thought I'd just do a quick example here on some of those more advanced elements. I don't want to tell you how to do it, but we'll run through some examples on and how we can use those kind of things to give you some ideas on how we can achieve the requirements for that practical. So you can see here I've just constructed a very basic start-stop motor circuit. On the right hand side here we have our motor output coil, we have our start and stop buttons, and we have a contact that is a latching contact that is controlled by the motor. So just to see how that works, I hit the start button, motor output is energized, I release the start button, motor contact holds in until I push the stop button, and then everything goes back to stop until I hit the start again. So the first thing I want to look at is using this motor coil to control other elements within our program. So we know that that coil there is going to be attached to an output, but I can still use that internally to do something else. So let's say I want a cooling fan here. So when the motor turns on, I want the cooling fan to also run. So the easiest way for me to do that is to add another rung. And on that rung, I'm going to have an output for my cooling fan. Here it is here, cooling fan. And I need to figure out how I'm going to control that. So remember, I want this to come on when the motor is on. If the motor is running, then the cooling fan should also be running. Now I could build another stop-start circuit here with the same stop button, but the same start button. But the simplest way to do it would just be add a normally open contact and connect that to my motor. So that means that whenever the motor output turns on, that coil turns on, this contact will close, which should then energize the cooling fan. Let's see if that works. Oh, still got my stop button pushed in. So I hit the start button, the motor output is energized, that closes our contact here to latch the motor on, and it also closes this contact here to turn the cooling fan on. So that works. If I hit the stop button up here, you'll see that because the motor turns off, it also opens this contact, and then the cooling fan turns off as well. So that's a fairly simple, elegant solution to control the cooling fan output at the same time as the motor turns on. Very simple there. Turn the motor on, cooling fan starts. Turn the motor off, cooling fan stops. It's just controlled by that contact. Okay, so let's try the opposite then. What if I want something that will turn off when the motor runs, or turns on when the motor is off? And this is kind of like an interlock, right? So if something that I want to turn off when this motor is running. In the case of our PLC practical, the thing that I want to turn off is the other motor. So let's look how we would do that. So I'm going to make this one a stop light. So we're going to say that there's a light that turns on whenever the motor is not running. It might be a red light above the motor or something like that. So the stop light turns on whenever the motor is not running. So again, I'm just going to add another rung. I'm going to throw an output on there, and we're calling that one stop lamp. So I've got a coil there, and that's going to be connected to my stop lamp. And I'm going to use the exact same principles I used for the cooling fan, but it's just opposite, isn't it? So I put a contact in there. We connect that to my motor again because I want this thing to operate in sync with the motor. It's just that I want it to do the opposite thing. So the easiest way to do that, normally closed contact. So we should see then that every time the motor turns on, it's going to open that normally closed contact, and the stop lamp will be off. Every time the motor turns on, every time the motor turns off, it's going to de-energize this normally closed contact, which would then be closed, and that should turn the stop lamp on. Let's have a look. So we see the stop lamp is illuminated, the motor is not running, so the stop lamp is going. I hit the start button, that turns on my motor coil, that also turns on my cooling fan as we did before, and we can see that that motor coil is now switching the contact over here, the normally closed contact, which then turns the lamp off. If I stop the motor, that contact recloses and my stop lamp turns on. Nice and easy. So that would be an example of an interlock, right? The thing, whatever it is I'm trying to control, turns off when this particular coil here is energized. And I could, of course, I could power that off anything I like. In fact, if I change that to cooling fan, we should get the exact same effect because we know that the cooling fan is running whenever the motor is running. So it should do exactly the same thing. I turn on the motor. Oh, my stop button's still down. Turn on my motor, which closes this contact, which energizes this coil, which opens this contact here. So now we've got a chain effect. I can add anything I like to that. I'll switch that back to motor. Okay, so let's have a look at timers then. What if I wanted a siren to turn on every time I started the motor to warn other people that the motor has been turned on, that the process has started, or whatever it is. But I only want that siren to run for, let's say, 5 seconds. So I want a warning timer that's going to turn on the siren for 5 seconds whenever the motor starts. So I'm going to add another rung. And the simplest way to do these things is to add new rungs. We can stack up a lot of functions on a single rung, but often it's easier, less messy to do it on separate rungs. So I have to think about, what do I want this to do? I'm going to put an output here, and that's going to be my warning siren. And I want that to turn on for 5 seconds whenever the motor starts. I want that to turn on for 5 seconds, only 5 seconds whenever the motor starts. I'm going to put my timer on a separate rung. I don't need that on the same rung, so let's add our timer there, and we're calling that one warning timer. So we're going to control this siren then, let's say with a normally closed contact, running from the warning siren, the warning timer output, which is Q. Remember that the output of our timer is always Q. So if I have it like this, well, actually that's not going to work because the timer will start ticking down as soon as I apply power. So I need this to be controlled off the motor, right? We only want that to run when the motor runs. So I'll pop another contact in there, and we'll connect that one off the motor. It's because I only want the timer to start working once the motor runs. Let's have a look at how that works. Motor is already running. Oh, my start button is pushed. Okay, so at the moment nothing is operating. The stop lamp is operating, motor is off, fan is off, warning siren is off. I hit the start button, that turns on my motor, turns off, the motor turning on turns off the stop lamp, motor turning on turns on the cooling fan, motor turning on applies power to my warning timer. Let's just check my settings. I need to put a time delay on that, so I'm saying 5,000 milliseconds. Let's stop the whole thing. So I hit start. Hit start. warning siren is on, and once the timer ticks down, it opens that contact and the warning siren turns off. Now I've got a bit of an issue here because the way I've set it up, it means that anytime the motor is not running, the warning siren will be activated. So I need another control here. The reason that happens, this is a normally closed contact which only opens when the timer ticks down. If the timer is sitting idle, then the contact will remain closed. So now if I turn the motor off, I've got my warning siren blaring away, which is no good. So I'm just going to add another control element in here. What I want to happen is the warning siren obviously is controlled by this timer, but it also can only come on when the motor is running. So if I want it to only come on when the motor is running, I need to add another normally open contact turned on by the motor, right? Let's see how that works. Now the motor is not running, and therefore this contact is open. That means the warning siren is not going. My stop lamp is, because the stop lamp turns on whenever the motor is not running. So let's start the motor and see what happens. Now my warning siren has turned on because the motor coil closes that contact. This one remains normally closed until that timer has ticked down, and now it opens it. So now the warning siren turns off. If I stop the whole circuit, nothing happens. The motor's not running, so no power can flow through to my warning siren. As soon as I start it again, warning siren starts, and once we tick that down, this contact open, warning siren turns off. So now we've got a time delay warning siren. As soon as the motor starts up, the siren goes. And when the motor is turned off, the warning siren is not running. And it only runs for 5 seconds after the timer turns on. Okay, I want to add one more element in here. I'm going to say the cooling fan. That's nice that the cooling fan is running when the motor is running. But actually, I want the cooling fan to keep running. I want it to run for another 10 seconds after the motor has turned off. So when the motor turns off, I want the cooling fan to continue running for another 10 seconds. Let's have a think about how I'm going to achieve that. So I'm going to need a timer, obviously. And that timer needs to be triggered when the motor turns off. Right? Because when the motor turns off, it's going to turn that timer on. When that timer counts down, while that timer is counting down, I want it to hold power onto my cooling fan. So what that means is I'll need another contact in parallel with this one. So the motor can turn the cooling fan off, but also the timer can hold the cooling fan on. So I'm going to delete that contact there and add a branch. Remember, if we put two contacts in parallel, that means that either of those things can turn the output on. So if I want the cooling fan to run, I can either do it when the motor is running, so I make that one motor, or I want to do it when fan delay timer. Well, I want it controlled by the fan delay timer, but that one's going to be normally closed, right? So when the motor is energized, it turns this contact on, which then turns on the cooling fan. That's fine. When the motor turns off, this contact will open, but the fan will still get power through here because that's normally closed, and the cooling fan stays on. So that contact there, that normally closed contact, is going to hold power onto the cooling fan. Now I just need to add a timer to tell that contact to switch off after 10 seconds. 10 seconds after the motor has switched off. So we throw another rung in here. Let's put it right next to our fan delay contact. So this one will have a timer in it. We're going to call that fan delay timer, fan off delay. And I've already set that up to be 10 seconds, you can see there. So when that timer counts down, this should open. Now, how it is at the moment is not really going to work, because as soon as I turn the circuit on, whether the motor is running or not, the fan delay timer is ticking down. You see that ticking down 10 seconds, opens that circuit, cooling fan turns off. But it's got no relationship to the motor whatsoever. So I'm going to need to throw another contact in there, right? And again, that contact should be off my motor. But I want this timer to start when the motor turns off. So that needs to be a normally closed contact, doesn't it? So when the motor turns off, this contact is closed and the fan delay timer starts counting down. When the motor is on, this contact will be open and the fan delay timer will do nothing. That means that this contact will remain closed, but that's okay, because when the motor is on, we do want that cooling fan running regardless. So let's see how this works. It does mean that when I start the system, when I first turn it on, my cooling fan will start automatically. But that's okay, we've got to count down 10 seconds. Let's see what we've got. Okay, so my cooling fan is off, my motor is off, my warning siren is off. As soon as I turn the motor on, that should open this circuit here, which will reset the timer. So timer has reset. Timer is dead at the moment. There's no power going to it. We just saw our warning siren there count down. It's 5 seconds and turn off. Stop lamp is off, obviously, because the motor is running. Cooling fan is on because we want the cooling fan to run when the motor is on. This contact here is holding the cooling fan on. And that's it. So just our fan and our motor are running. So now let's look what happens when I stop the circuit. Motor turns off. This contact opens. However, the fan delay closed contact is holding this on. Once the fan delay timer ticks down, it's 10 seconds. It switches this contact off and the cooling fan will turn off. And when I hit the stop switch, when I hit the start switch again, that's going to reset this timer circuit, because that contact will open. Stop button on. So now my motor is running, my fan is running. As soon as I hit the stop button to turn the motor off, timer starts ticking down. This contact is still closed, holding the cooling fan on. And once we tick down to 0, contact opens, cooling fan turns off. Okay, so we've run through a number of functions there. We've figured out how to make this second output turn on when the first one does. That is, the cooling fan turns on when the motor turns on via a normally open contact here. We've figured out how to operate a stop lamp. So that's doing the same thing as the cooling fan, but the opposite. It only comes on when the motor is off, and it turns off again when the motor starts, and we use the normally closed contact to do that. We figured out how to make a warning timer, so that starts when the motor is turned on, and then when it ticks down, it turns off. So it gives us a 5-second siren warning people in the plant that that process has started. And then to make sure that we continue to cool the motor after it's been shut down for another 10 seconds, we have added this fan off delay circuit to our previous cooling fan circuit. Notice that each of my rungs here only has a few elements on it. When you do your practical, you might have a few more on some of your rungs, but I find it easier and simpler to add an additional rung rather than try and jam everything onto the same one. This is specifically important, I think, with your timers. Put the timer on a separate rung, and then the contacts that it is closing go into the circuits that we want to control. As ever, if you have any issues, please get in touch. That'll do us. Cheers.